The morning sun filtered gently through the curtains of a modest flat in Bristol. Evelyn sat at the kitchen table, stirring her tea absent-mindedly. Her life, though quiet, had a comforting rhythm. She had given up her marketing career 3 years ago when her husband, Thomas, received a job offer in London that demanded most of his time and energy. They had agreed she would manage the home while he focused on building his career. She had kept her end of the deal, faithfully, patiently, lovingly. The post arrived as usual with a soft clatter on the doormat. Evelyn padded across the hallway in her slippers, picked up the stack, and flicked through the envelopes. One caught her eye. Thick paper, sharp edges, official-looking. Her name was printed in clean black ink. She opened it, expecting a notice or perhaps an invitation. It was neither. Her hands trembled as her eyes scanned the first few lines. It was from a solicitor. Thomas had filed for divorce. No warning. No argument. No explanation. She sat down slowly, the letter slipping from her fingers onto the floor. All at once, the flat felt colder, as if the heart had been cut out of it. The kitchen clock ticked on indifferently, as if nothing had changed. But everything had. Later that evening, Thomas came home late, as he often did. Evelyn waited in the sitting room, her face pale but composed. "You want a divorce?" she asked quietly, holding the letter in her hand. He didn't flinch. In fact, he looked relieved. "It's for the best. You've done nothing with yourself these past years. You're just there, Evelyn. You've become invisible." Her breath caught in her throat. She wanted to scream, to ask how he could be so cruel after everything they had built together. But the words wouldn't come. She didn't cry. Not then. Instead, she nodded once and stood up. She walked past him, leaving the letter on the coffee table. Thomas didn't stop her. In the bedroom, she packed a small bag. Not because she was leaving, but because she needed air, space, silence. She needed to remember who she was before she became invisible. She stepped out into the night, the chill biting at her cheeks. Everything she thought she knew was crumbling, but something deeper stirred within her. Not rage, not sorrow, resolve. Evelyn found herself walking aimlessly through the quiet streets of Bristol. The city, with its cobbled lanes and flickering street lamps, felt both familiar and foreign. Every step seemed to echo the confusion pounding in her head. Where had it all gone wrong? She ended up at the old suspension bridge, the same place where Thomas had once proposed to her under a drizzle of soft rain. Back then, everything had seemed possible. She leaned against the cold railing, staring out into the darkness, trying to find answers in the void. She thought of calling someone, her mother, her friend Anya in Bath, but the words felt too heavy to speak. What would she even say? That her husband had cast her aside like a used coat? Instead, she returned home just before dawn. Thomas was asleep in the guest room now. She noticed he had taken only his essentials, leaving most of their shared life untouched. Framed photos, books they once read together, the small plant she always watered, and he always forgot. Evelyn sat in silence until the sun rose, then made herself toast she couldn't eat and tea she didn't drink. Later that morning, she began to pack. Not just for space, but for clarity. She boxed the wedding photos, the anniversary cards, the matching mugs. It wasn't bitterness. It was survival. In the corner of the bedroom wardrobe, she found an old folder. Inside were her certificates from university, her first job offer, clippings of campaigns she once led. She smiled faintly. That woman, the one with fire in her eyes, still existed. Her phone buzzed. A message from Anya. "Heard from Mark that you're going through something. Do you want to come stay in Bath for a while?" Evelyn stared at the message. Anya had always been a voice of reason, someone who never sugarcoated the truth, but always stood by her. Without thinking too much, she replied, "Yes, I think I need that." By afternoon, she had packed a suitcase and called for a cab. Thomas wasn't home when she left. She left no note. As the train pulled out of Bristol Temple Mead Station, Evelyn looked out at the passing fields, her reflection flickering in the window. She didn't feel strong yet. She didn't know what came next. But at least now she was moving. The past was behind her. And somewhere ahead, something new waited. Bath greeted Evelyn with soft golden light, its Georgian terraces washed in late afternoon sun. The city seemed quieter than she remembered, slower in its rhythm, as if gently coaxing her into calm. Anya lived in a narrow townhouse on Sydney Place, not far from the Holborn Museum. The door creaked as it opened, revealing her friend in a loose jumper and socks with little foxes on them. "You look like you've been through a wind tunnel," Anya said, pulling Evelyn into a hug without waiting for an answer. The guest room was small but warm. A single bed with a patchwork quilt, a writing desk under the window, and the faint scent of lavender in the air. It wasn't home, but it was safe. Over tea, Evelyn finally let herself speak. Not everything, not yet. But enough for Anya to nod slowly and say, "You don't need to fix anything today. You just need to breathe." The next few days passed in a gentle blur. Mornings were quiet, filled with long walks by the river and afternoons spent in cafes with old novels and coffee that went cold. Anya worked from home, her voice rising and falling in video calls, while Evelyn rediscovered the art of silence. She began writing again. Nothing ambitious, just thoughts in a notebook. Snippets of memory. Odd lines that floated to her in the bath or just before sleep. Once, she caught herself smiling at a sentence, and it startled her. But not everything was peaceful. At night, she would wake up tangled in the sheets, haunted by moments that replayed like film reels, the look on Thomas's face, the sound of the door closing behind her, the weight of not knowing why. One evening, as they sat in the kitchen over a bottle of red wine, Anya finally asked, "Do you think he had someone else?" Evelyn flinched. "I don't know. Maybe. He changed so fast. Like he'd already decided, months before he told me." "You were never the problem," Anya said, with quiet certainty. "He was just too cowardly to tell the truth." Evelyn looked down at her glass, the wine deep and still. She wasn't ready to confront that possibility. But maybe, deep down, she already knew. That night, she pulled out her laptop for the first time in weeks. She opened a blank document. The cursor blinked at her, steady and patient. She began to type. Not about Thomas. About a woman on a train, leaving behind a city and a man who no longer saw her. A woman beginning again. The story wasn't finished, not even close. But it had started. And so had she. It was a Tuesday when Evelyn received the message. She had just returned from a walk through Henrietta Park, fingers pink from the cold, when her phone buzzed on the windowsill. She ignored it at first, thinking it was Anya reminding her to pick up more oat milk. But then she saw the name. Thomas. Her breath caught. The message was short. "Can we talk? I think I owe you an explanation." She stared at it for a long time, the words blurring in the late afternoon light. Her heart didn't leap. It didn't break, either. It just ached. Dull and familiar. Anya walked in moments later, holding a tub of soup from the deli. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, placing the soup on the counter. "In a way, I have." She showed her the message. Anya read it silently. "You don't owe him anything." "I know," Evelyn replied. "But I think I need to hear it. Not for him. For me." The meeting was arranged for Friday. A neutral cafe halfway between their old home and her temporary new one. Evelyn spent the days leading up to it in a quiet state of preparation. Not for confrontation, but for closure. Friday arrived draped in mist. The kind of fog that clung to buildings and turned headlights into halos. Evelyn dressed simply. A gray coat, black boots, and the scarf her mother had knitted years ago. No makeup. No perfume. Just herself. He was already there when she arrived. Thomas looked different. Paler. Thinner. His hands fidgeted with his coffee cup, and when he saw her, he stood too quickly, almost knocking the chair behind him. "Evelyn," he said, like her name hurt to speak. "Thomas." They sat. The silence stretched between them like a tightrope. Finally, he said, "I handled it terribly. I panicked." "You didn't just panic," she said quietly. "You walked away." He nodded, eyes on the table. "I was scared. I felt stuck." I didn't know how to say it without destroying you. So I avoided it. I convinced myself you'd be fine. That you didn't need me. That you wouldn't even miss me. Her chest tightened. And did you find what you were looking for? Thomas hesitated. There was someone, yes. But it didn't last. It wasn't about her. It was about me being lost. Evelyn didn't flinch. She simply nodded. I needed to hear that, she said. Not because I want you back. I don't. But because I spent months blaming myself for your silence. I thought I failed you somehow. You didn't, he whispered. You were the best part of my life. I just didn't know how to be worthy of it. Evelyn stood. I hope you figure that out someday. She didn't look back as she walked away. The mist had lifted slightly, revealing the outlines of the buildings more clearly. So much of her life had been lived in someone else's shadow. But now, the road ahead belonged only to her. And she was finally ready to walk it. Spring crept quietly into Bath. The first blossoms began to appear along the royal crescent, and the morning light softened, no longer bruised by winter. Evelyn found herself walking more, thinking less. The weight in her chest that had once been constant now stirred only occasionally. One Saturday morning, she returned home to find a pale blue envelope slipped through the letterbox. No stamp, no sender. She turned it over. Her name was written in familiar handwriting, delicate, slanted, unmistakably Eleanor's. Evelyn hesitated. Eleanor was Thomas's mother. She hadn't heard from the woman since the day of the divorce. A cold, clipped phone call in which Eleanor had expressed regret, but also an unmistakable sense of relief. With a small breath, Evelyn opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of creamy stationery. The message was brief. Dear Evelyn, I hope you are well. I would like to speak with you if you're willing. I understand if not. Please come to Hawthorne House. Saturday next noon. Eleanor. Anya raised an eyebrow when she heard. You're not seriously thinking of going? I am.
Why?
What could she possibly say that matters now? I don't know, Evelyn said. But curiosity's a powerful thing. The following Saturday, Evelyn boarded the train to the countryside. Hawthorne House was nestled at the edge of Wiltshire, an ivy-draped estate that had once felt like home. It was where she and Thomas had spent summers drinking tea in the rose garden, where she'd played piano in the west parlor while Eleanor listened quietly, always with a faint smile. Now, walking up the gravel path, she felt like a ghost revisiting her former life. Eleanor opened the door herself. She looked older. Her hair, once steely and elegant, was now white at the temples. But her posture remained rigid, composed. She greeted Evelyn with a nod. You came. I did. They sat in the drawing room, where the scent of old books and lavender oil still lingered. For a long while, Eleanor said nothing. Then she began. I owe you an apology. Evelyn blinked. I judged you, Eleanor said, hands folded in her lap. I thought you were too gentle. Too quiet. Not strong enough for what I thought my son needed. Evelyn didn't speak. The silence stretched, heavy but not cruel. I see now I was wrong. You were exactly what he needed. And he let you go. Eleanor's gaze met hers. I wanted you to know that. Before it's too late. The implication hung in the air. Evelyn's voice was soft. Are you ill? Eleanor looked away. The doctors say I have time. But I don't want to leave this world with more regret than I already carry. Evelyn stood, unsure what to do with the mix of sorrow and confusion building inside her. Thank you, she said at last, for telling me. Outside, the garden had begun to bloom again. White blossoms trembled in the wind, fragile and persistent. Evelyn walked slowly down the path, not sure if she would ever return again. But something in her had changed. Closure, like spring, had finally begun to settle. Days after her visit to Hawthorne House, Evelyn found herself restless. Something about Eleanor's words lingered, echoing in the quiet corners of her flat. She kept replaying their conversation, not just for what was said, but for what had been carefully left out. There had been a pause, brief but heavy, when Eleanor had said, he let you go. Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that something was buried beneath that statement. Something unsaid. Anya noticed her distraction. "You're pacing again," she said over coffee. "I know," Evelyn muttered. "Do you remember the envelope? The one Eleanor sent?" "Yes. It wasn't posted, which means someone delivered it. By hand." Anya narrowed her eyes. "You think it was Thomas?" "I don't know. But it means he might know she wrote to me." The idea made Evelyn's stomach tighten. She hadn't seen Thomas in nearly a year. She had no desire to reignite old wounds, and yet, the idea that he might still be orbiting her life sent a ripple of something she couldn't quite name through her. Later that week, she took a walk through the center of Bath. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the cobbles. She passed the bookshop where they used to browse on Sundays, the tea room where they'd shared countless slow afternoons. Then, outside the small music shop on Pulteney Street, she stopped short. There he was. Thomas. He was standing at the window, staring in at a violin displayed behind the glass. Evelyn froze. He hadn't seen her. A part of her wanted to turn away, to vanish, to pretend the last 5 years had been a different life altogether. But another part, stronger, steadier, made her step forward. Thomas. He turned. His face, once so familiar, now felt distant. Older somehow. There were lines near his eyes, and a weariness in the way he held himself. "Evelyn," he said, voice low. "I didn't expect." She nodded. "Neither did I." They stood in silence for a moment, the world around them continuing on, oblivious. "I saw my mother," she said. He nodded. "She told me she was going to write." Evelyn studied him. "So you knew?" "I did." There it was. The unspoken truth between them. "Why now?" she asked. Thomas looked away, hands in his pockets. "Because I've been meaning to say something. For a long time." Evelyn waited. "I was wrong," he said finally. "I thought you were the reason I felt stuck. That if I left, I'd find something more. Purpose, passion, whatever it was I thought I'd lost. But it wasn't you, Evie. It was me." She held his gaze, surprised at how steady she felt. "I don't need an apology," she said. "Not anymore." He smiled faintly. "I think I needed to say it anyway." For a long moment, they simply stood there, two people who had once been everything to each other, now strangers connected by shared history and broken dreams. Then Evelyn said, "I should go." He nodded. "Take care, Evelyn." "You too, Thomas." And with that, she turned and walked away, her heart unexpectedly light. Some truths, once spoken, didn't need to be held anymore. They only needed to be heard. Evelyn returned home feeling hollowed out and quietly unburdened. Seeing Thomas again had not brought the storm she'd feared, nor the ache she'd braced for. It had simply happened. A chapter closing with the weightless turn of a page. She sat by the window, a blanket draped over her lap, the kettle humming in the background. Her thoughts turned back to Eleanor, the quiet despair in her eyes, the house filled with silence and lingering regrets. The next morning, a package arrived by post. No name, no note. Just her address, printed carefully in neat block letters. Inside was a small wooden box. Evelyn opened it slowly. Within lay a bundle of old letters tied with twine, aged at the corners, their edges brittle. The ink had faded on some, but each was unmistakably written in Eleanor's hand. One in particular was marked with a single word. For Evelyn. Her breath caught in her chest. She unfolded it with trembling fingers and began to read. My dear Evelyn, there is so much I have never said to you, and perhaps never will say aloud. Not out of pride, though I've had too much of that, but because some truths are heavier when spoken. Still, I write now because silence has done enough damage. You were never useless. Not to my son. Not to this family. Certainly not to me. The problem was never who you were, it was that I refused to see you clearly. I measured you against a vision of the life I thought Thomas deserved. And when you didn't match it, I dismissed you. But I see now, you were everything he needed. Steady. Kind. Strong in the quietest of ways. And I helped push you away, not out of malice, but out of fear that he might choose a different path than the one I had carved out for him. I failed both of you, and I am sorry. There is no request for forgiveness here, only a hope that one day, when you are strong enough, you might see that love isn't always loud or obvious. Sometimes, it hides beneath years of mistakes, waiting to be unburied. With regret and hope, Eleanor. Evelyn read the letter twice, then a third time. By the end, her cheeks were wet. She didn't cry often. Not anymore. But something in Eleanor's words struck a chord so deep, it reverberated in every part of her that had ever wondered if she was enough. She gathered the letters and returned them to the box, hands moving gently, reverently, like she was placing something sacred back into the earth. Later that evening, Evelyn sat at her writing desk. She stared at a blank sheet of paper. Then she wrote, "Dear Eleanor, thank you." She left it at that. A letter never meant to be sent, but written all the same. Sometimes it was enough to speak into the silence and know it might be heard. The days grew colder in the village, the skies often a slate gray that stretched endlessly above the quiet hills. Evelyn found herself walking more, not to escape anything, but to listen, to the stillness, to her own breath, to the world she'd once ignored in her hurry to please and belong. She passed familiar places with new eyes. The corner bakery, where she'd once hesitated to spend money on herself. The florist, where she'd chosen roses for anniversaries Thomas forgot. The library, where she once hid between pages rather than face her unraveling home. Now they looked different. Not haunted. Not bitter. Just honest. One evening, Evelyn stood before the hallway mirror. For years, she had glanced at it without truly looking. The woman reflected back at her now seemed different. Not younger, not softer, but real. There were lines around her eyes she didn't resent. Gray in her hair she no longer colored. She touched the edge of her jaw, the place where tears used to gather when she cried quietly in the bathroom. The door locked. She remembered that version of herself. The one who folded laundry with trembling hands. Who made excuses at dinner parties for why Thomas wasn't there. Who believed, down to her bones, that being loved meant being tolerated. "I see you now," she whispered. Her voice barely echoed, but the weight of those 4 words made her chest swell. Later that week, she received a call from Lily, Thomas's sister. The two hadn't spoken in over a year. "Evelyn," Lily's voice was hesitant. "I heard about Mom. I know things weren't easy. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry." Evelyn paused. "Thank you. Are you?" Lily hesitated. "Are you all right?" "I am," Evelyn said. Then, with a small smile she didn't force, she added, "I truly am." There was silence, not awkward but full. Something had shifted. Something had let go. That night, Evelyn dug through the loft for an old photo album. Dust flew as she opened the leather-bound cover. Pages filled with smiles, some real, some staged, but all part of the tapestry of her life. She stopped at a photo of herself from years ago. Young, bright-eyed, full of dreams. "I didn't fail you," she said softly to the image. "I just took longer to come home." Then she closed the album, stood, and walked downstairs. There was no ceremony to it. No thunderclap. Just a woman reclaiming her own story, one quiet step at a time. She didn't need anyone to recognize her worth now. She had seen it in the mirror. And she believed it. Thomas sat at his desk, the London skyline dim behind him, framed by the sleek glass windows of his high-rise office. The clink of his cufflinks as he adjusted them sounded louder than usual in the silence. His assistant had gone for the day. So had his wife, Melissa, leaving only a perfumed trace in the penthouse they shared, a scent he now found oddly cloying. The papers in front of him blurred as he lost focus. His divorce from Evelyn had finalized nearly a year ago. His life had resumed its predictable rhythm, the one he'd once claimed to crave. No fuss, no emotional entanglements, only results and appearances. But lately he had begun to feel something foreign. An emptiness that money didn't hush. A hollowness in the polished calm of his new life. Then, the letter arrived. It was hand-addressed, the slanted handwriting instantly familiar. He stared at it for nearly an hour before opening it. His fingers trembled slightly, the way they hadn't in years, not since the early days of his firm, when failure was still possible. He unfolded the note. Thomas, I'm writing not for answers, but to close the door myself. I spent years waiting for you to explain why I wasn't enough, why you looked through me, why you asked for a divorce like you were canceling a subscription. But I've learned now that your silence was your answer. You didn't see me because you never looked. You didn't value me because you didn't know how. And that's not my shame anymore. I don't need your remorse. I don't expect change. This letter isn't a key to reopen anything between us. It is a record. A truth you can't rewrite. I was not a useless wife. I was a woman who loved, hoped, and stayed far longer than I should have.
Goodbye.
Evelyn. He read it twice. 3 times. Then again, slower, as if the words would alter if he caught them from a different angle. They didn't. She had let him go with more grace than he deserved. He felt the strange sting of it, not because she wanted nothing from him, but because she'd found strength he had never imagined. She had walked through fire, and somehow come out clearer, not charred. And he was left with his reflections, his guilt, his curated life of pristine surfaces and no depth. The letter fell to his desk like a quiet verdict. He didn't call her, didn't write back. He knew better now. He had lost more than a marriage. He had lost a woman who saw him at his worst and still tried, until she stopped. Until she realized she deserved more. And now, she had it. Evelyn stood by the window of her modest cottage in the Lake District, her tea cooling in her hands. The mist rolled low over the hills, soft and quiet, the kind of silence that wrapped around the soul rather than pressed against it. It had been a full year since she'd walked away from her old life, from the elegant home in Chelsea, from the cold marriage, from the version of herself she no longer recognized. The mornings here were different. Gentle. Forgiving. There were no sharp stilettos on marble floors, no clipped conversations, no perfumed silences thick with resentment. Just birdsong, fresh air, and the low hum of a life being rebuilt from the roots up. Her phone buzzed. A message from Grace. How's the new job going? The girls at the cafe miss you already. Evelyn smiled. She had left the bakery in Yorkshire to take a new position managing a small guest house nestled between the hills and the lakes. It was hard work, early starts, laundry, guests with endless questions, but it was hers. Her effort, her rhythm, her choice. And for once, she didn't feel invisible. She stepped outside, the grass damp underfoot, and walked the winding path towards the lake. In the distance, a group of schoolchildren were skipping stones, their laughter ringing clear. She paused, breathing in the moment. "Morning, Evelyn," came a voice behind her. It was Adam, the carpenter, who ran the workshop down the lane. He tipped his cap and offered a smile, warm and unhurried. "Morning, Adam," she replied. There was no undercurrent in the exchange. No weight. Just 2 people greeting the day. As she continued her walk, Evelyn thought of the letter she had sent to Thomas. She had not expected a reply, and none had come. But that was never the point. She hadn't written it for him. She had written it to reclaim her voice. She remembered her old self, the woman who had sat silently through dinner parties, who had shrunk when criticized, who had tried to be less so someone else could feel more. That woman no longer lived here. The lake shimmered in the mid-morning light. Evelyn sat on a bench, watching the way the ripples spread wide and unbothered. She felt a lightness she once thought impossible. Not happiness in the flashy, dramatic sense, but peace. Real, quiet, earned peace. And maybe, just maybe, the kindling of something new. Not from a man, not from a miracle, but from herself. She had once been discarded. Now she had arrived,